what might be happening next year at our school as we prepare for what learning might look like. And I think there's some good learnings and lessons for us in having a fairly solid 3 months, given the pandemic, of figuring out how to have our kids experience education in the best way possible. And so I think with tech, with access, with participation, some solid ground made there to then build from, and thinking about teaching and learning and perhaps remote learning if we're forced to go there in the fall. So that's the second update. Are there any questions there, or any questions about what I brought up initially around just the toll that the past few weeks have taken on us as a school as we forge ahead? Great. So the last note I'll just underline here is that we are following the DOE's guidance, obviously, but we are going remote with summer learning for Summer Academy this summer. And so it will not be in person. Our 12-month folks will be working remotely, and school will be engaged with in the same manner as we've done over the past 3 months. If there are no questions, that's the head of school report.
Okay, let's go to the dashboard.
Great. So if you shift over to the dashboard, there are 5 updates or points I want to make there. And they're brief, but I think it's just worth giving you a sense of where we are as a school as we close things out. So in table 1 under student enrollment, I just say that enrollment has been steady. I don't believe there's been any change in enrollment over the past 3 months, and it's continued in that way. So no change there. In moving on to table 5 for student attendance, I alluded to this earlier, but attendance has also remained steady. The goal for the year was 93% of our kids on average in the building every day. We're hovering around that 92% over the past few months. And so steady is the headline there. Moving on to table 7 under student recruitment, and this is for next year. The headlines here for me would be, we're well positioned in the 6th grade right now. If you read the table quickly, we've got 82 students firmly enrolled, or an anticipated number of seats of 94. So we're close to where we want to be, and that work continues daily. So I feel well positioned there. The 9th grade, the second kind of major entry point, gains have been made over the past month, so I'm pleased there. We have approximately 50 kids, which is an increase over last month, continuing from our 8th grade on to our 9th grade. And that number may increase by a few more over the coming week or so. And so we have added to that 44 new students from other 8th grades in other schools enrolling in our school in the coming year. So fairly good progress made there too, with room to close that gap. I think finally I'll say we're monitoring 10th grade. It's trickier to backfill after a student is enrolled in high school, but we've done it before, and there are some seats that we do want to fill as we increase the size of our 9th grade to 10th grade next year. And I'll say one strategy that has worked well for us over the past few weeks is in contacting students who graduated from a middle school a year ago who are now in 9th grades at other schools and may not be feeling like that's the right spot for them. And so we've had a few students who have nodded saying, yes, I'd like to return, and we have seats for them. So that feels promising as we continue to backfill or increase seats, I should say, in the 10th grade. Are there any questions there?
Yeah, I guess I'm surprised. It looks like there's a fair amount of attrition from 10th to 11th and 11th to 12th, where I think we don't usually expect a lot of tradition that late in the game. It's about 10 students out of, in the low 60s, so it's like 15%-ish.
You're looking at the difference between target enrollment, or?
I'm looking at table 1 versus table 7.
Yeah.
Anticipated. I guess I'm looking at the anticipated column in 7 and comparing it to the, I guess, likely and enroll, I guess the likely enrollment in table 1.
Yeah. Let's see. I think attrition. So, attrition overall this year has been fairly solid. Under 10%. I think it was 6.3% the last time I looked, and that's another table. Yeah, that's table 3, Jake. I can say 2 years ago we did experience some attrition, particularly in our 9th grade going to 10th grade, with moving from Brownsville to Bed-Stuy. But that was the year that kind of in grade level that comes to mind most with regard to attrition. But this year it's been fairly steady.
Maybe I'm reading this wrong. I guess tell me if this is right. I see 72 students in the 11th grade now.
Yep.
But we're only expecting 63 in the 12th grade next year.
Yeah, some of that's just conservative assumptions on we believe based on past trends that there could be some movement next year. Okay. So we embed some of that attrition in. And if Chris is still on,
does that sort of feel like for the same reason, because we don't want to backfill in those grades, those are pretty tough years to have that much attrition.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Chris, are you on? Are you able to address the assumptions from 10th grade to 11th grade? Oh, so. Yeah, I can look into that a bit more, Jake, and kind of see if there's something kind of more clear, digestible. I will do that and circle back. Are there other questions about the tables thus far?
Just in my sort of financially conservative mind, I think of those students as particularly valuable because we get the real estate supplement from them too, and I know we're not going to backfill them. So to the extent that we're using our resources of the sort of recruitment resources, I think those are particularly those are I don't know what the right word is for the starting quarterback, but that's who we really want to recruit.
Yeah, those are our starting quarterbacks in this. Let's see, attrition. Just trying to understand.
And I don't know how even this is. How are you doing how is the engagement working right now in terms of finding new students and keeping them? I look at this and I say, you've got at least 3 really good facts out there that should be promoted, all over the community. You're at 93% moving on to, kind of postgraduate work, college. You've got 1-to-1 computers starting next year. You've got, I can't remember the exact number, but the attendance numbers were ridiculous when the school went remote. It almost felt like it went up, right? Mm-hmm. I think so. There's a lot of really good news, and is that all getting pushed out to the community so that people know what's going on, so that we can attract more people?
Yeah, I think there's room to get better at it. But even 2 hours ago with our incoming freshmen or incoming 6th grade parents who know other parents, I was able to tout our first graduating class who came into our school as 6th graders, like the kids of the parents I spoke with this year, who are now graduating, and then being able to talk about some of the stats that I presented to you at the beginning of tonight's session around graduation and matriculation. So that's happening as much as we can get it out there. Social media has been our asset. That's what we've gone to in connecting with most of our families. And I know that Chris and Kelly were pretty savvy in how they're able to connect with families in that way. But that's been our major resource. And with 1-to-1, I think that's a more recent phenomenon, but getting out there now. And I think that's the good move, as you presented recently.
Yeah, and just a little piece of, unsolicited advice. I would pick 3 things and 3 things only, like in terms of data to tell a good story. Maybe go to 4. People are there's a lot of good stuff here, but when you inundate them with data, they kind of lose it. So I think as you think about, how to pitch the school to parents and kids, pick the 3 most important things and just bam, over and over again. The old thing, say 3 things 7 times, not 7 things, right? And I think it will go a long way toward recruiting, because we are actually seeing good hard numbers now that are very positive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Great. Let me see. I think there were one or two other points to make here. Yeah, quickly. So looking at table 8, and this is just an update, but it's an update of no change. So with staff retention, that's held steady over the past month from May to June. And, sometimes things can move at this point in the year. We haven't experienced that yet. And then with staff recruitment, I've listed out some of the positions here that we still have openings for. Digging that bit more deeply, we got a pipeline for 90% of these positions. The one that I'm sort of eyeing right now is high school history, where I'd like to focus on expanding our pipeline more. And there are some unknowns with regard to what the market for solid teaching looks like, as different schools and networks have different needs and resources and are making different decisions about their budgets for the coming year. So it's possible that we may see more so or something different this year than what we've seen in the past with pipeline and people being available. And so I think with that, those are the updates that I would provide for the dashboard this month.
Okay, and then on the strategic side?
Yeah, there are 2 updates here I think that are worthy of conversation or presentation at the very least. And so one is I want to talk a bit about an item in the school year report around contingency plans as we think about the upcoming year and how we plan forward so that we've responsibly set things up for perhaps a few different scenarios in what schooling looks like. And so there's certainly unknowns out there too. So as we gain more information, I think as of right now, I mentioned we're going remote this summer for our 12-month staff and for Summer Academy. The idea is to sort of gather more information between now and July and then make a decision by the 24th of July about what things will look like at the beginning of the school year. That's the hope. Things could change, but we're hoping we have more information then, which would allow for us to adequately prepare for what we ultimately provide in terms of the schooling experience next year. But I think there are 3 possibilities now, right? We either go in person, like we have in the past, we go remote, or some hybrid or blended model where we do a bit of both. And so the blended model is the more complex. We've done the other 2 and have experienced those. So with the blended model, I think there are a few different configurations for what that might look like. And one big factor involved in what best to do is guidelines for social distancing and what that then results in. For example, how many kids we have in different spaces at the middle school versus high school and what our capacities are. We have done a bit of analysis at the high school, and right now, if we were to use the guidelines put forward by the DOE for spacing in public schools with our private space, we can have up to 90 students in our space. Mind you, our enrollment at the high school is closer to 300 students. So it's a third of our kids could be in the building if those guidelines hold and we abide by those same guidelines, which is, I think, probably the right thing to do. So with that comes, okay, how do you then best engage with kids and have them experience school in the best way possible, given that constraint? And so with that, there are different scenarios. Maybe you have some kids in the building on certain days and some kids not, some kids in the morning, some kids in the afternoon. Maybe it's some kids experiencing learning remotely more often or most often, while other kids are in the building who need that support in person more so, working with teachers physically. And so those are some of the models that are out there that are being talked about. For us, it comes down to what we're best at, what we're not best at, and what our kids need. And looking at those different configurations, figuring out which one is optimal. So that's going on now as we gain more information. We'll zero in on if we're going blended, that model that works best for us.
Is there any additional guidance, Josh, about how, if you're operating at less than full capacity, whether you can have full reign on picking who comes in or not, or is there an issue of discrimination one way or the other, if some kids have to come in and some others don't, or people who prefer one and end up getting in the other bucket and all of that. I just don't know whether there's anything out there that would tell you how you need to do that if you have space for a third of your kids.
The DOE came out with the chancellor came out with some guidelines last week that were very, very in the sky, not super concrete with regard to here's what you must do. And so there hasn't been anything other than that I've seen. But I think those are the questions that families would pose out and that we would ask ourselves in terms of what seems right. And so, obviously having some kids in the building, not others, could cause for some frustrations for families. And so
it seems that one answer is, the kids who have special services would benefit more than the others from being in the building and having physical interactions with the extra support. But I don't know if that could be attacked as a reason.
Yeah. Just to take it a step further, there could be a scenario in which maybe you have a third of a third on certain days, and then on the fourth and fifth day, there's more kind of interventions for targeted groups, and that small group, and then other kids are learning independently during that time. That might be somewhat of a compromise where everyone's getting a bit of what they need, but I think we're going to be debating and deliberating about what seems to make the most sense. And I think we kind of also hope that there's more information coming our way in the coming 30 days.
Yeah.
Are we required to follow the DOE guidelines, or then sort of whatever the DOE does?
No. In terms of safety issues and what's going on with the pandemic, we've been very closely, in I think all cases, kind of following their footsteps, except for the first decision we made with regard to how long we'd be out of school remote, where we extended that out further than the DOE. We've been in lockstep with safety decisions.
Got it. I guess I don't know how much you or anybody is focused on sort of what's going on in Europe at all, but because they have a longer school year and they hit the crisis a little sooner, they're mostly back at school. And so I feel like by the time September rolls around, or even August, there will be a lot to know. And I'm not at all convinced that the city and the DOE will decide to know what there is to know, if that makes any sense, or to learn those lessons. But I don't think that should prevent us from doing so, even if it's a little bit controversial.
Yeah, that's a good.
Couldn't agree more.
Jay,
I mean,
go ahead, Jim.
Sorry, go ahead, Marian.
No, I was just going to say my experience, which is limited to my nieces and nephews in France. The country reopened May 11th, and by now they started going to school every other day or whatever. And my sister's a doctor, so she was in a different bucket, but I think within probably 3 weeks they were back to going every day. So it's a different age group and everything, but it seems that there's probably some learning. Now, you look at the paper and you see that there's a second wave in Beijing. So who knows what, we may be wasting our time even thinking about what's going to happen.
Yeah, the notion to me that we would follow guidelines that to me are unfollowable, the notion that we would be responsible, the educators responsible for ensuring that social distancing is maintained in the school, and that means a third of your kids, and they have to be distanced, because that's what's the point of doing it if they're not going to be distanced. There's just all sorts of things that come to mind that it's just not workable, So I think, kind of where I am, let's make sure we've got distance learning figured out. We know how to do it in the classroom. Make sure we figure out distance really well. And then maybe where this whole world ends up is, it's the parents and students' call as to whether you go to school or not, but assume that other kids are not going to obey the rules and there's not going to be this proper distancing at all times. And that's, I don't know. I mean, I just don't see how it's workable. You'd have to have hall monitors and classroom monitors, and kids get unruly, especially in the high school. I don't know how you maintain those rules, but we'll see. I think there's a lot more data to come out.
I guess sort of what I'm saying is a little bit of the hypothesis or gestalt of our movement as a charter school movement is that the DOE might not know everything, and I feel that particularly in this moment, where I think this is going to be very politicized in the DOE. The teachers union is going to have a major and conservative impact on whatever comes out. And so although I think we've been doing the right thing so far because we're like in the crisis, and it was probably a little too high risk to do anything differently. But I think we should try to by August do whatever we think is really the right, smart, analytical thing, not necessarily swim with the DOE tide.
Yeah. No, this is helpful, and I think these aren't solutions, but two other factors that come to mind as we take part in this discussion is one. I think we would have to abide by DOE policy at the middle school because we're in a DOE space. The high school, we may have more autonomy. With the other thought that came to mind is, and this is a bit more depressing, but back in March, if there was a case of COVID in the school, you closed for 2 days and figured things out and had to then figure things out to reopen. That was like a single case. And so I think about that, and I think about then the likelihood of being remote on some occasion, and the likelihood is strong.
I think we have more data now. I think people, especially, we've got a couple more months to learn. I think there's more data now and more people going through, experiencing this. So I think there'll be a lot more thought into how this all happens. Have you talked to the staff about, hey, if we were to reopen and allow everybody in, would you show up to work? Is there any concern at that level?
No, thank you for that. Great question. Thanks for bringing that up. We are, tomorrow I will be sending out a survey to our families with the same sorts of questions. The DOE put one out earlier this week, so we'll follow their steps and use a similar survey. And then us doing the same thing with staff is also in the cards. So yes.
Okay.
We've had one instance.
We also have to think about, when parents are back at work, right, whose offices are starting to reopen next week, right? Mm-hmm. And your kids are, is it really viable to have the kids home alone if nobody's there? I guess the high school kids are old enough that that's not a problem. But I don't know, how does everything work, right? How does the free lunch work if like some people are in and some people are remote? And I think there's just a lot of thinking to do, including in your schedule, is the class format where you have 30 kids to one teacher still the right way to think about it? And the way you normally organize a week, sort of still the right way, or are you better off, having kids take part in like maybe some broader group classes some days and then coming in just for small group stuff, and then you can have multiple small groups? I don't know. It just seems like we don't know, right? We don't know whether it's going to be relaxed in such a way that people are going to be able to show up in person. We don't know if it's going to make no sense in such a way that you're going to want people to still be remote, or whether we're going to need to think about it not in a binary way like that and sort of rethink how we get organized.
No, you're right. And I think elementary schools will have the biggest challenges here with kind of parenting and how to balance all of that. As a middle school, it is somewhat mixed, but yet another model might be that our sixth grade, who are transitioning from fifth grade, are doing more in-person stuff than our seventh and eighth grade, just because of like where they are developmentally and independence and all of that. So,
and you see some of the universities, right, have moved to like all the lectures are going to be remote, but some of the smaller teaching sessions are maybe going to be in person. So I don't know. Maybe there's an equivalent dividing line for high school.
Yeah. So yeah, lots to consider over the course of July and August. The other point I wanted to bring up around strategy was just that it's year 7 now. We're moving into year 8, so we're moving into the tail end of our first renewal term, and so I'm beginning to think more about what renewal looks like, whether we go with an outside party assist with the renewal process, and then just what we want to underline as a school in our accomplishments and what we want to get better in over the coming year in putting forward a strong 4th year. And so that's just now underway.
Yeah, I mean, we need to talk to Sarah. Obviously, she's probably best positioned here, and probably Josh. And I know last time when we went through this, we had a pretty strong sense of which metrics we were kind of teaching to the test for in that intervening year. So that's worth thinking about and seeing what it is that the authorizers are going to care about. Not that we ditch everything else, but just making sure we think about what they're going to look at.
Yeah, benchmark 1 is a big one. Great. So that's the strategic planning portion of our meeting.
Okay, great. Let's move on to AFC.
Great. Leslie,
can I throw one other strategic thing in there? Just maybe not for this session, but for next session.
Yeah, please.
It came up on the South Bronx Basketball Board meeting. Is I feel like there's and actually we had our mid-charter audit today with the authorizer, and they brought it up too.
Yeah.
Which is I think the board diversity and board representation from the local community members and just sort of generally. So I think we probably got to come up with a plan to improve on both metrics. Yeah,
that's been on my mind too. I think both at the governance level and at the leadership level and at the point of creating pipelines to encourage diversity among all aspects of our school, including leadership. Yep, that's real.
I think we're good in terms of number of people living in Brooklyn. I think
we've improved there. Yes, we have.
We've had a couple moves, but
here we are virtually doing this, but we've got a full house of local folks in the mix.
But whatever happened to Lenny?
So Lenny works at Brooklyn Hospital, and so he's been, I think, very, very busy with that.
Okay.
He corresponded just before things got busy with the pandemic. And I CC'd him on an email last week, but didn't hear back from him. So I think he's probably just very, very busy with this stuff. But I'll continue to circle back at the right times.
Yeah, I mean, do you think he's going to formally come on board, or do you think he's just going to keep floating around?
I think I think he would love to. It's just sort of like getting on through with some of the preliminary stuff, some of the nasty paperwork we got to fill out at the beginning.
Okay.
I'll fill out his paperwork for him. I'm offering.
I'll team you guys up by email tomorrow morning.
and just sort of one last thing on the last topic in terms of like coming up with the plan for August is curious if Trudy has any ideas, but just I think you should try to find a few parents who you can stay in touch with to sort of bounce ideas off of, engage, how the whatever plan you start to come up with, it's not in a vacuum.
Yeah, no, I think there's the survey, and then there's the focus group, and you can get really rich information out of a focus group, and so yeah, absolutely.
Okay, should we head over to AFC?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk to the April report that was reviewed by the Finance Committee last week sometime. So net income, we're projected to end the year at $390,731. That includes the last 2 months of projections for the school year. This is against a budget of $102,886,000. So we're up now at an impact over budget of $287,846,000. In regards to how did we get there? In regards to revenue is projected to be $128,676 higher than budget. Not much has really changed from the last month. We're showing the higher enrollment changes with good numbers in Gen Ed and SPED. We're getting a couple of dollars increase on the lease assistance. Title grants has increased based on the final allocation that was received. There was an increase in IDEA, and the restricted contributions are still factored into this projections, which is $10,413. Any questions on revenue? In regards to expenses are projected to be lower than budget by $159,170. We took the opportunity during this month, with the last 2 months remaining for the rest of the year, and anticipating that we will still be in this distance learning environment. We're showing some considerable savings on things such as curriculum and classroom expenses, which are lower by roughly $58,000. We're showing lower compensation and benefits, which is the timing of teachers and the hiring there, and also some savings on our medical and dental benefits. But the offset of that is that, we're showing slightly higher in, things like that I've mentioned over the course of the last few months, with insurance fees, things like professional services, and that's due to the higher athletics budget that is being covered by the restricted contributions and revenue. The higher repairs in the Chromebooks, and also in professional development, we're still factoring in that there'll be $40,000 of other PD. We also factored into this projection, we had miscellaneous expenses of roughly $20,000 that were unallocated for. The good news about that is between the last time that we had our AFC meeting and where we are now, we were able to clear up those miscellaneous expenses and reallocate a majority of them to the respective categories. So when we do this report next year, or at the end of the year timeframe, we necessarily will not have any of those type of unallocated expenses in that miscellaneous expense category. Are there any questions in regards to expenses? Okay, moving on to cash flow. Cash on hand is roughly $2,814,354, excluding the escrow balance. Part of why that cash on hand as of this time frame in April is because of we received the last per pupil payment for the year. It does not include any type of monies that were factored in for the PPP CARES loan. That, of course, was received in May and is being hung up on the balance sheet as a loan payable until it is forgiven, which probably won't happen until the next school year. The amount of money of the cash on hand represents 89 days of cash on hand, which brings us a lot closer to the 90 days of cash on hand that is expected for the full year. But as we know, as we go on to the months after, and as we start to spend that money throughout the next couple of months, we may see that the days of cash on hand will go down, and it'll probably be around the 50 or 60 day mark, which is, the normal trajectory as we see, as we're in between those years of when we receive the next per pupil payment. Projected cash to carry over into 2021 school year is $803,250. That does include roughly the $75,000 of escrow, but it does not include any of the cash for the PPP CARES loan. As we know that the amount of cash that was received for that loan was roughly $1,753,200. Cash on hand for FNOB as of June 6th was $1,029,298. One of the things that we discussed at the AFC was the potential of possibly taking some of the money from FOMB and transferring it to satisfy, at least some of the bills for some of the bills that Unity has that were expected to be repaid by FOMB. And if that is something that we do want to do that is agreed upon, it was suggested that that would be something that will be made before the end of the year so that we can show the transfer of those funds in time for the audit.
What are those expenses?
Well, currently, right now, if you were to look at the balance sheet for Unity, there's roughly about $800,000 that are expected that FOMB was to pay to Unity. And what happens there is that, we have that gap for the expenses in regards to the amount of rent that is paid to FNOB to the Friends of entity, and then the Friends of entity pays that lesser amount of leases to the leaseholder. So roughly every month we clear about $40,000 that goes into the FOMB account. And then due to all of the all of the contributions that were received, whether it was through the stock or through any type of monetary, it's built up over the years. So any of expenses that relate to the high school in regards to cleaning the school, in regards to paying for security, things like, any type of maintenance, all of those expenses, even though they flow through Unity, we put them on the balance sheet in regards that are expenses that are expected to come back to Unity through FOMB. And we have not made any type of, if we want to call it, reimbursement to Unity this entire year.
I'm on mute. Got it. So really I think the right way to do this in an ideal world, and anyway, I'm not sure it's necessary to do it as ideal as it should be, is FOMB should be contracting for those sort of facility related expenses, which will help justify that we're charging a higher rent to Unity than we're paying to the landlord.
Mm-hmm. And
so ideally, it wouldn't be FOMB pushing the money back to Unity and then Unity paying for them. It would be FOMB as the landlord would have the contract with the cleaning company or the security company or what have you, or should they be insurance contracts? I think the insurance we do run through FOMB, but sort of the types of things that are facility related, we would run through FOMB as opposed to pushing them back to Unity and have FOMB push the cash that way.
Yeah, and have a due from. Yeah, and when we do our budgets every year, we always do factor in to that there's a certain amount of money that FOMB is going to give back to Unity. And I'm not saying we have to fund the fully amount that's outstanding, of course not. But in regards of settling, or doing what's right, maybe if we just look at what the budgeted amount was, which was roughly like $95,000 or so, we can look at those associated expenses that were that are still on the balance sheet that are associated with the Unity, and maybe just make that transfer.
I think
like doing our good due diligence or whatever.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jake, I think, on this, that the contracting entity should be the landlord, not the school, for landlord-related costs. And the landlord should pay those costs. We're doing it indirectly, I get it. But I think it's a little cleaner if the landlord is the party to these landlord-related contracts. I don't know if those are easily assignable across to, clarify that that's the relationship, but it feels like that's what should be done here.
If we ever get sort of audited on the rent supplement, that'll definitely be, to me, that seems like it'll support the narrative we've described with the relationship.
Yeah, it's It is in fact what landlords are supposed to do, and they're supposed to pay these. We just I think we were kind of moving pretty quickly there. Josh, is there somebody at the school who could look into all those contracts and see if we can assign them over?
Yeah, let me see if that may be the best move for Chris.
Yeah, I think just anything landlord related, let's just clean it up and have the landlord pay it, not the school pay it and landlord reimburse, and just,
It'll get to the same net result as what Leslie's saying, where you'll get those expenses off of Unity's balance sheet and onto FOMB's. So it'll help the way Unity looks from a authorizer perspective, but I think it'll also be more in keeping with the spirit of the way we're sort of maxing out our subsidy with the state, even though it's not what we pay our landlord.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What sort of timeline is ideal here?
Maybe by the next school year. But what's our fiscal year?
June
30.
Yeah. I mean, we could always backdate it, or I don't know. But ideally, we sort of set it up for the next fiscal year. I don't know. Does that sound right?
I don't disagree with that. I just think we still have the question of what do we do in respect of this year, right? In respect of the stuff that has flown through and in the way that it probably shouldn't have if we had set it up more cleanly. And I think Leslie's saying she thinks the number is 95,000. I think if we can support that, I think we should move it over.
I mean, one of the things that the auditor is going to ask for is that when they do say, when they do ask what the 95,000 that's coming back to FOMB pay for, right? I can look at the balance sheet, right? Because for any of those invoices that were put through, that were hung up on our balance sheet as a due to from FOMB, we actually have those invoices. So we can say it went for this, it went for that, it went for whatever. And it may not be exactly 95. I think when I looked at it quickly, I can pick up anything between 88,000 to 100,000.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think we're going to look, any auditor, they'll tell you it's a form and substance, form versus substance, right? And I think the substance of what we're talking about, I think there's agreement on the landlord should pay landlord costs. We've been doing it that the landlord pays it, but only after Unity submits for reimbursement. Mm-hmm. Probably better go the other direction, right? Probably better have the landlord just pay it. So I think, and so I guess the only question in terms of the audit and the financials, right now the expenses are recorded at Unity, and then there's a to from reimbursement. Should those expenses properly be removed from Unity, recorded at FOMB, and so Unity really has nothing to do with it in terms of the form, in terms of what the auditors, how the books are kept.
Well, the expenses are not on Unity's books. Whenever those expenses come in, we put it on the balance sheet as a due to from FOMB. So it's not affecting Unity's P&L at all.
That's payable, but what about the P&L? Who shows the actual maintenance expense, not the payable to from?
It's on the balance sheet as a due to.
But what about the income statement? Right. I mean, those are income statement items at Unity, right? Unity expects a reimbursement from FOMB, but right. Unity is the one who's paying, right? Unity is paying the vendors.
Mm-hmm. But it's not hitting like those maintenance expenses. If you were to look at the P&L, all the maintenance expenses for the high school are not under the maintenance expenses on the P&L for Unity.
You mean
they're over at FOMB?
They're part of the rent?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I get it.
The rent is an inflated amount. So all of that is considered as part of the rent, right? So it's moved into the due to from FOMB and not necessarily on the P&L at all.
So where, if we incur, somebody mops the floors, we incur a janitorial expense. Mm-hmm. Where is that janitorial expense line item? Is it at Unity or is it at FOMB?
It's on a due to from FOMB. So it's an expected expense that it's expected to come back from FOMB, but it's not on the P&L of Unity.
Okay. I think we need to...
So then it should be on the P&L of FOMB, basically.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I think we need to tidy that up a little bit.
Agreed. But we also need to figure out what we do for this year in terms of the reimbursement, it seems like if there are some reimbursements that should have been made that haven't been made, they should be made before the year closes, or the books are going to get closed and something that the auditors are going to question.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Leslie, maybe go back and figure out which number is right between the 88 and the 100, and then we'll figure it out. And then you'll need presumably a board meeting of FONB to decide to send the money over.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then hopefully next year or next fiscal year we try to switch everything over to FOMB. Marianne, Jeanette, there's nothing wrong with putting these expenses at FOMB, the non-pro, 501c3 or anything like that, right?
I can't think of anything.
Okay.
They're both 501c3s.
Yeah, there's no profit motive or anything. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think the two buckets aren't different. I think the point you made is the right one, which is, we need to be careful here because we're maxing our subsidy by doing this. So we just need to make sure that it doesn't look obviously wrong or manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So my takeaway is that I'll get Josh, a certain amount. I'll look at the expenses and give him a list of expenses that I think are reimbursable. And I'll go back to the beginning of this fiscal year and look at some of those expenses.
Yeah, and just, keeping in mind for everybody, right? There's a reason why everything is done this way, and it is because these are real estate related costs that under a standard lease would be borne by the landlord. So this is, we just need to document it in a way that's consistent with the intent, but this is all the right thing to do. We just need to make sure it's papered properly.
Yep. Exactly.
We have an approval item for the budget. Do we want to dig into the budget now or when it comes up for approval? Josh, do you have a preference? Is there anything else?
I don't think there's anything else for the month. I'm happy to talk through it now, or we can take a moment. Two of them? Wow. Uh-oh.
We should have the insurance also. I don't know if that's part of AFC or part of approval, but that's another item that we need to talk about.
Let's talk about everything now, I think. Do you want to talk about insurance now?
Yeah, and I see that Chris is on, so he can chime in. So insurance, we picked Gallagher as the broker of record for Unity when we started the school. So they've been our broker for a while. And because it's one of the largest single line items, and because of the rules about bidding and everything, we decided to put the package out to bid this year. And Chris arranged for quotes from both Gallagher and a different broker, First Fidelity, who's a smaller brokerage that specializes in schools, among other things. And Chris and I have spent the last week trying to understand the comparison of the quotes we got from both. The good news is both of them are below what we were paying this year, which is a remarkable achievement because the insurance market rates have generally gone up. So it is a good thing that we are managing to keep costs down. We have a table that shows, what each of them is proposing to charge in each line of coverage. The piece that we haven't fully gone to is whether the terms of coverage, including the limits and the deductible and everything, would be exactly the same, or whether we're paying, if you will, for the reduced cost by coverage getting reduced in some places. So at the moment, we're talking about a total bill of about $120,000, give or take, for both brokers. One is slightly below that, the other one is slightly above. The difference between the two is probably $7,000. With our incumbent broker coming in as more expensive and the new broker coming in a little bit cheaper. That said, going back, there seems to be a couple differences in coverage, including the incumbent broker includes FONB and the other broker has not built that in yet. There's also a difference in the scope of coverage on the educator's liability, with one having a cap at 10 million and the other one at 3. And above the cap, you slip into the umbrella. So I'm torn about it, frankly. I think we need approval to renew the insurance program, on whatever terms Chris and I conclude is the right thing to do. I am slightly inclined, and Chris doesn't even know that yet because we haven't talked to him. I'm slightly inclined to stick with the program we have and with Gallagher, just because comparing the details of the lines of coverage on every single insurance line, of which we have probably 20 or 30, seems very painful. And I'm a little worried that if we switch, we're going to realize after we've switched that we've actually lost in coverage. But that being said, it would mean picking somebody who's giving us a quote that is, call it like maybe 5% more expensive than the other. So we could go either way. I think the process has revealed qualities and flaws for both brokers, including some things that kind of fell through the cracks in prior years. It's been a very worthwhile exercise to put this out to bid and think about it from scratch. I am a little bit wary of kind of switching and realizing if we switch that we've lost some coverage that we would have liked to keep, but I don't think we'd be going. If you guys tell me we have to go with the lower bid, I'm okay with that. I think if we, given the fact that we still haven't been able to fully resolve the uncertainties around the scope of coverage and that we've been at it for a week, I'm kind of inclined to just stay put. Chris, do you want to comment?
I agree. I think we have two good options. If anything, we have more coverage now and the premium's going down. So I think we have two good options. I'd be happy with either.
What's the order of magnitude of what's the price delta between the two?
It's one is at 118 and one at 125.
Okay.
And by the time we finish comparing coverage and adjusting limits and whatever, I think it would be smaller than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Price is obviously one concern, but there's a lot more that goes into this stuff.
Yeah, I think the service would be good either way. My only question is if you've seen those policies, they're hundreds of pages, and it's just going to be very hard to ascertain that the coverage is the same. And we've in fact found that there are some places where one's better than the other, but it's not. The problem is you can only really do that once you've picked the broker, because a broker isn't going to go through 5,000 pages of stuff until they're retained. And so it just seems like a complicated thing to be doing for, a 2% savings or 5% savings.
That completely makes sense to me. And I guess my only question would be, there's nothing you found in going through this more carefully this year that makes you feel like the past broker was sort of dishonest or they were sort of leading us astray in prior years?
No, but we were able to quite substantially get them to reduce the workers' comp premium. I think we overpaid in prior years. I don't know why they weren't properly incentivized to figure out the lowest price carrier. And then there are a couple we also came up on the fact that we thought we had bound, I think in one line, I think it was crime coverage, and it turns out it wasn't in the package. And so we fixed that obviously going forward. So we've ascertained that there had been some things that fell through the cracks. I don't think it was ill will, and I don't think we've discovered any evidence of malpractice. I think we've kind of tested the proposition of, are there other coverages we should be buying? And both brokers have been relatively good in telling us, you should consider this, or you don't need that because it's largely covered elsewhere. but that process can be continued with the broker we pick in the next week or so if we find that some coverage needs to be customized. So no, we haven't found anything that would be dishonest. I think that the model, Jake, is, one is a smaller brokerage where the broker who is mostly in charge is a former charter school CEO, I think, who's a more experienced guy in his career who made a later switch to insurance, and so you have access to more senior people. Gallagher, who we are currently with, it is a very big broker. It's one of the biggest brokers out there. They have a big charter school division. They have a big program that we benefit from. But they're a machine, and our primary contact is a kid who's probably 3 years out of college. So there's pros and cons sort of to both.
Got it. That's helpful. I'm certainly comfortable keeping the same for what it's worth.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed.
But also comfortable giving the approval for Marianne and Chris to figure it out.
Do we want to do an approval now, since we're on the topic, or Josh?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is approval to stick with the current coverage and approval for Chris and Marianne to keep pedaling. And if something materially changes, is it give them discretion to do that thing? Is that what we're saying, or does it come back?
I think if you give us discretion to bind the insurance, if we keep the fee at what we've been quoted, which I think is around 120 something. So if we keep it under 130 or 135, giving it a little wiggle room just in case we find some coverage that we absolutely need in the next week, I think we can work with that and just get it finalized.
Okay, so just to make it simple for you guys then, should we say approval for either option as long as the total doesn't exceed 135? Does that make it easier?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. I'll leave it to Jeanette or whoever's the wordsmither on this to figure out that.
Yep.
But I think we're all on the same page here. So all in favor? 1, 2, 3. My internet's really slow. Is anybody not raising their hands? I'm on satellite. I'll assume, okay, we're good. Okay, thank you. So that is approved. That's one down. Should we jump straight into the budget?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So if you go back to there are lots of fund files in the finance folder for the AFC meeting. There's also, if you want a summary version of things, there's a summary in the budget in the Excel file, and then there's also a summary in the school leader report. I'm going to focus on that, and if folks from the AFC want to chip in and offer a deeper dive, we can do so there too. So I'm just going to talk through some of the headlines that I think go into this budget. And so enrollment's always the biggest piece, right? And so right now it's set with this budget at 536, which is essentially what we had this year experientially and what we had budgeted. So on target, we're assuming the same enrollment for the coming year budgetarily and targeting something beyond that. With SPED enrollment, we're basing our enrollment with special education on our latest numbers, which were March of this year. We don't have exact citing on the number of students coming in the 6th grade and their special education needs versus our outgoing 12th grade. So there could be a bit of movement there depending on whether they're the same with regard to needs or different. We'll have that information in the coming week or two. Per pupil revenues are set at the New York State release level of 16,123. That's very similar to this past year of 16,150. So relatively the same. With restricted donations, we're setting that at 338,000, which is more than we did this past year, but we're doing so with the following restricted donations. this amount of 338 is based on restricted donations that we've collected that we're now using to fund some things, which I'll get into in a moment, as well as the differential between the lease and sublease that we've been talking about, and then also the tax exemption for the year, and that's new this year. Compensation is set at 7.7 this year versus 7.6, so very close to last year. Relatively flat, a slight increase. And then other expenses here beyond compensation include professional development, where we're allocating more to professional development and training this year. A lot of that's being funded through the restricted donation on the revenue side of things. And so that would include paying for executive coaching with our budget. It would also include some increases in development in the math and sciences, as well as culture. Technology-wise, we've also increased the amount of money going to student computers and to staff computers, and anticipating some level of remote learning and a need for technology more so than what we've had in the past few years. So that's reflected there. And our goal this year is to go one-to-one, as Jim mentioned earlier. And so that would require purchasing more of what we have so that we're safely in a good place with the number of laptops we have in reserve for the coming year. Net income-wise, net income is set at 194 versus 131 last year. The big difference between last year and this year is really that tax abatement. And those are the big kind of headlines for the budget that's being proposed tonight. Mario and Jim, is there anything you'd add to what I've said?
I don't really have anything. You know, we've been through this, I don't know how many times, Josh and I, and then the smaller group. So I'm comfortable with it. I think we just need to remember that the world is constantly changing. And we have a couple months here and it's going to change more. So, you know, we have an obligation to approve a budget. I think this one's responsible. It reflects kind of our live within our means, way we've gone about the school from day one. But I think we also understand that things will likely change and we'll have to react and we'll have to make some adjustments here, you know, in the next month or two. But I think it's a very good start. I think it's conservative. I think it addresses some of the areas that we know we need to invest more in. And it's, again, kind of living within our means. So I'm fine with the caveat that I anticipate we're going to shuffle some things around based on what the world looks like when we reopen.
Yeah, I agreed with Jim. I think if the state budget is in dire straits, you know, we should be prepared to course correct if and when we find that the per pupil decreases. I think we have some PPP funds that we're currently sitting on that could be used if that became necessary, but we'll have to talk about that when the time comes. I think we are all familiar with the enrollment woes and whether kids show up in the numbers we expect them to when school starts, especially if school doesn't start in person and all of that. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. On the same theme, and I told Josh this, we've been pretty good at keeping very good track of enrollment on the revenue side for years and talking about that pretty much at every other meeting. I told Josh that on the other side of the P&L, comp is 75% of the expenses, and we only talk about it after the fact. And I think I would like to see the process change so that we talk about the envelope that goes to compensation before agreements are entered into with people who then come to rely on that. So I think we should have a discussion at mid-year or whenever about what we think we're going to offer and when, because those are the two biggest budget drivers. And so we should know what we're walking into and do it kind of in a concerted manner. And then there was one more thing I wanted to mention, but it completely escapes me right now. So if I think about it again, I will. I'll let you know.
I do want to just mention that on the tax abatement, it seems very, very likely to me, but we don't have it yet, just for what it's worth. And it doesn't sound like that's going to swing things too dramatically, but just, do want to give that disclaimer.
Okay. Anybody else with questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Not seeing any of that. So,
just one maybe final point here. And again, I think the idea of revisiting this, if need be, is an important one as we get into figuring out schooling next year. There are unknowns about a lot of stuff. My sense is, I think that if you were to ask me sort of like where are we perhaps most susceptible to unknowns here, and what should we keep a close eye on, which I think is a good question to pose out. I want better sighting on SPED enrollment. That has swayed things in the past. And so again, depending on the number of kids that come in to our 6th grade versus the number of kids who graduated with SPED needs in the 12th grade, there's a difference there that will sway things somewhat. So we'll have a better sense of that next month. And then, I think we're as good as we've ever been at enrollment. We had a fairly solid, consistent year with things, but there's just more unknown or uncertainty than ever before. And so, we'll sort of see how things shake out. Public transportation, busing, what are families deciding on? What do they feel comfortable with? All those elements come into the year and are new this year versus any other year. So,
the last thing, Josh, I remember it is I think it's the first time we have a budget where we are anticipating to plug in what would be a deficit with contributions. Right, FNB contributions. If you take out the 300 and whatever number, then we're at negative 200, which I don't think is a problem we can't overcome, because I think those contributions are money we have and they're specifically tied to expenses. But I think what would be helpful to see is the budget with all that taken out, right? To see what it is that we're balancing. And I'm not saying that should be our operating budget, but I'd like to see the numbers of sort of those restricted contributions, what goes against them, and if you take those out of the expense lines, what does it look like? Just to see, because these are, I think your point in doing it that way is, well, these are things we wouldn't do if we didn't have somebody else paying for them, which is fine, but I think we're sort of, I would like to understand the kind of normal budget and then the extras that we're paying with the restricted contributions.
When will you be done?
For what it's worth, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think if that 300 is going toward things that we would like to make part of the budget every year going forward, you kind of got to say, okay, let's figure out, is this really a one-off, or is this something we need to plan for and not count on those restricted funds coming in going forward? I don't know. None of us know what the fundraising environment is going to look like going forward. We haven't been really good at in the past, and it feels like, I don't know, everybody else's feedback is giving generally expected to go up or down. I would expect down by a considerable amount, but I don't have any good data. But to the extent we're funding something that we want to keep doing year after year with a one-time restricted donation, I think we need to think long and hard about that.
Yeah. Just to be clear, it's about $100,000 in restricted contributions. It's about $100,000 in tax abatement and about $100,000 in gap between the lease and sublease.
Okay, so 100 coming, that we should not count on for next year.
Actually, in 150 of that, yes, we should.
Okay.
It's a 2-year donation.
Okay. Okay. Any questions from anybody else? Anything you want to air out? Okay, terrific. So we will, then the motion, I guess, is to approve the budget for the coming school year. In favor? Okay. Budget is approved. Thank you very much. Check that off. Anything else on the AFC side?
No.
Let's see. Budget. Okay. Let's move on to DFC.
From my angle, no updates to report out from the DFC meeting.
Okay. ECPC.
Same.
Okay. SLC.
SLC, we've covered most of what was addressed. I'll talk about the calendar in a minute. But I believe that all components that we thought were significant were addressed either in the school leader report or in the dashboard or in the strategic planning portion of the meeting. Is that, Jeanette, would you agree with that? Ken, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, great. And associate board?
No one present tonight, no updates.
Okay. Okay, so let's go through some approvals. Okay, the first item is the minutes from the prior meeting. Does anybody have any questions around those minutes? Anything they want corrected? Okay, so all in favor of approving the minutes? Okay, thank you. Budget calendar for the school year. Josh, you want to?
Yeah, so what I'd like to do is the DOE still has not come out with their calendar for the school year because of maybe unknowns, but they typically come out with it in April. So we've been waiting for that, and it's nice to kind of compare that before going live with our calendar. So I held off last month from bringing it up for approval, but I feel what I'd propose here, and I can talk about the ins and outs of the calendar too. Why don't I do that first and then make my proposal? So the calendar for the coming year has the following highlights or updates from the prior year. There are 180 instructional days the school year. That's similar to last year, the same as last year. Some changes are with the middle school calendar, we are going to embed baseline diagnostics in September just because we don't have the same testing data for the spring. And so we'll do that work at the beginning of the coming year so we have a sense of where kids are at the beginning. With the high school, it's similar this year. We have 4 quarters, and so there are exams at the semester tail end and then at the mid-mark or quarter mark. And that's in addition to PSATs, SATs, AP exams, etc. So that's generally the assessment aspect of the high school calendar. The calendar I'm putting up applies to both on-site or remote learning. It wouldn't change. And yeah, so with regard to waiting for the DOE, what I'd love to have happen is maybe we hold off a bit longer until I get the DOE calendar, or don't, in which case we feel like we've got to get something to our families so that they have dates they need to plan for the year, and our staff does too. And we probably have to make a decision on that next week. Would it be possible to designate 1 or 2 members from the board to review quickly what we finalize, when it's finalized, and then allow for them to approve so that I can then get it out to constituents?
I don't have a problem with that.
I think we should approve and delegate authority to someone to make, changes.
Yeah, I sort of agree with that, but I think, Josh, you'll have to exercise your judgment about how different it is, right? I mean,
and whether there are material changes, yeah.
If it's fundamentally different because school is going to start in November, then we got to talk about this.
Yeah. No, I think the highlights I gave you, I don't expect any changes. I don't think the DOE is going to do that too. It's mainly about aligning vacations and things, which is not significant with number of days of school, but does mean something for families.
Okay, so the approval, I guess, is approve the current version of the calendar for the coming year, subject to Josh doing additional work over the next week or 2. If there are material changes to be proposed, he comes back to the SLC and gets approval there. Does that make sense?
I can bring it back to the board then. It'll
The
clear
board.
through SLC and then be approved if SLC recommends it to the board in July.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
In terms of designees, does anyone want to volunteer for this? Thanks, Ken. From the sofa.
I'm happy to too, Josh.
All right, thanks. I'll come to both of you. Thank you.
Okay, so, but to be clear, we are approving something right now, right? And then it's only a change that we come back to the board with, or do you want to come back to the board with something later? Sorry. Oop.
I think you come back later with information if it's not a fundamental change, but if it's fundamentally changed, then you come back for approval.
Okay, so we'll go back to what, yeah, okay, so we're approving the current calendar, and then if there is a material change, if there is a change, it will go through the SLC. If people at the SLC decide to material, it will come back to the full board for a new approval. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All in favor? Whatever I just said, yeah. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. PNC we did. The next item is me. I'm another third-year anniversary already. That's 6.
Time flies.
So, all in favor of keeping me on the board? I will recuse myself. Okay, thank you.
You're like a fine wine, Jim. Better every year.
Here's the fun one, Jake. Oh wait, you're not treasurer anymore. Oh man, let's see. So the officers, I had the list open. Now I've lost it. Boom. Josh, you want to rip through who the current officers?
The current semblance is Jim is chair. Jake has served as vice chair. Mariona served as treasurer, and Trudy served as secretary.
Okay, and I don't know if there's been conversations around people wanting to come off or move around. Does anybody on that list have any, reservations or want to talk about, or does anybody else want to be the treasurer?
I'll continue. I'll continue if nobody else wants it, but if somebody else wants it, they're welcome to take it.
Okay. So, all in favor of keeping the current slate? Thank you very much. Okay, and then, Josh, I don't know what you do. The next one was a consideration of Board of Trustees committee changes. This time of the year, we typically open it up and see who wants to move around. Josh, I don't know if you've had side conversations with people on that. I have not.
Yeah, in a couple, in not all, but in various committees we have. And so I guess, I don't know, people can speak for themselves, but I don't know of any changes at this point. I will say that, so Sarah, who's not here tonight, is going to be moving from the board this fall, probably in September. And so with her departure and in filling her big shoes, there is right now a team of 2 without her. And so we have teams of 3 on all their committees. It might be nice to add one other mind to the SLC. Or we can do that officially in September when Sarah transitions off.
Oh,
I'm happy to join the SLC if you need another person.
We thought you might be in.
Yeah, we were going to nominate you if you put your hand.
Can I ask a question about that, Josh? Do we know why Sarah's stepping down?
A couple of changes professionally in a couple of moves. So she's been in correspondence with Jim too. So she's going to be staying in New York, but moving on to a slightly different, a bit of a career shift.
Okay. Can we emphasize in our search for board members somebody with a background in education? And if that means we have 4 people on the SLC, so be it. It seems that, and that is, I've gotten in trouble before when I've said we need more of this, more of that. That's in no way a criticism of the people who are you can't have just one person.
No, our committees are best when there are a few viewpoints and collective minds.
Yeah, I think we've operated well when we've had more than one person with with the ability to handle certain questions. So I think we should make that a priority.
I think it's also good for us to always be adding board members because inevitably there will be attrition. You know, we don't want to end up in this situation where, I don't know, there's a natural life cycle to these things, and so it's good if we're always adding people.
Yeah. The minimum number of members on our board, according to our bylaws, I think are 5, and so with Sarah's departure, we'd be at 7.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be afraid, and this comes more from my corporate background of big boards, but, you know, I think we have a group here that works well together, and I wouldn't mind taking it up to like a 9 or even more if it's the right talent and they contribute. I used to think the opposite, you know, 3 is enough, you know. So I think it's a good time and to look for that kind of talent and community folks, you know, things like that, just fill some holes that we might have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we will leave everything as is with the caveat that we'll be adding Jake to SLC. Jake, you're obviously free to join right now, but we'll slot you in as Sarah's replacement, if that makes sense. And I don't think, is that a voting matter in terms of the committees?
Jake, what was your question?
I was just going to say, just to the extent that you're talking to Sarah about her departure, it's always good if there's anybody she would recommend in her network that would be interested in the school.
Yeah, I think she's on that or
offered it, yeah. Yep. This isn't a voting matter, is it, in terms of these committee compositions, or is it?
We usually approve it.
Okay, so all in favor? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, the meeting schedule, pull that up. Josh, anything you want to say about that? I think it's self-explanatory.
My sense is that we made some improvements this past year to meeting times. We moved from Wednesday to Tuesday. We moved the meeting times for the general board meeting generally to the second Tuesday of the month rather than the first. And so holiday-wise, that's worked out well. So there are no changes other than it's just a different year where the dates fall on different days. So if everyone is okay with that, that's what it represents right now.
Okay. All in favor of the meeting schedule for the coming year? Okay, thank you. And then the final one is the governance action items. I don't know, Josh, has there been any change from prior year on this?
Yeah, the one change we're making is the change that Marianne alluded to earlier with having on the calendar, I think it's in December or January, reviewing the 5-year budget to then inform upcoming budget and, for example, compensation.
Yeah, it's a good change. Okay. Okay, great. Any questions from anybody, concerns? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, public comment. I don't know if there's anybody, I don't know who's on this on YouTube. I don't even know how we do this. Is there any public person on who wants to talk?
Chris might know, but he's on mute.
Seeing no boxes open up. Yeah. Okay, last thoughts. I don't really have any last thoughts. I think this was a lot quicker than I thought, which is great. I think we've kind of gotten to a mode here with these meetings where we can focus on the big stuff and push through the small stuff. So it's always nice to, to have that happen. But Josh and I have been talking a lot over the last several weeks, and I think, the only thing that I keep thinking, we just got to be prepared for change. We have no idea what's going to come up. And I don't even know what reopening, I don't know how to think about reopening. It's kind of fun to bounce ideas around in terms of how we'll react. I think the thing we keep coming back to is get that remote thing down and, figure that out. And then whether it's a hybrid approach or fully remote again, or the classroom, at least you'll have a really solid baseline and the parents will feel comfortable. I think if it's 100% remote, you're probably in a situation where the parents are also back in the apartment full time, sadly. But there's all these in between things that fun to think about, but it's really, really hard to act on. But the one thing you can act on is, I think, remote learning is here to stay at some level, and we need to be at the lead on that, invest in it, and get it right. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts, but that's kind of one of the things we've been talking about a lot lately.
I would just say it's been quite a year as we both experience everything we've had, and then also prepare for our first class to graduate next week. So it's happening in a very different way, but we're really happy for them and going to make this as special as we can. And so here we are on Zoom having a virtual meeting. Who would have thought 6 months ago? I think I'd also just say that I agree with you, Jim. I think these meetings have improved over the past year, and that's come from the input of folks on this call. And so I thank you for that. I think the meetings are more productive and impactful. So look forward to kind of staying the course and maybe making incremental improvements in the coming year too.
And I'll just add this. I think, I want to congratulate you, Josh, on graduating the first class. And it seems like, I say from a board perspective that things seem like they're moving a little smoother. Obviously, I have not, I think despite the fact of saying I was going to tune into some Zoom classes, I haven't yet. So I'm not sure about the classroom, but I'm assuming it's going the same. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so congratulations.
Cool.
Yeah, congratulations. Really, job well done to you and your whole team. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Great meeting. We'll talk again next month. Take care.
Thank you.
See you Friday. Mm-hmm.